Imagine standing in the ruins of your conquered city, watching as soldiers move methodically through the streets. You hear screaming. You see your neighbors dragged from their homes. Then they come for you. Within hours, you're no longer a person with a name, a family, a future. You're property, a commodity to be inspected, priced and sold to the highest bidder in a market where human beings are traded like livestock. This wasn't a rare occurrence. This wasn't an isolated tragedy. For centuries, as the Ottoman Empire expanded across 3 continents, this scene repeated itself in city after city, village after village. And the women who lived through these conquests faced a reality so brutal, so systematic, that its full scope has often been minimized or overlooked in historical accounts. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on what really happened to women in the wake of Ottoman military victories. Before we begin, if you find these hidden chapters of history as compelling as I do, make sure to subscribe to the Codex of History and hit that like button. And as you watch, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The story begins with an empire that would grow to become one of the most powerful forces in world history. Founded around the year 1299, the Ottoman Empire started as a small Turkish principality in northwestern Anatolia. But what began as a modest territory would, over the following centuries, expand into a vast domain stretching from the gates of Vienna to the shores of the Persian Gulf, from the Crimean Peninsula to the deserts of North Africa. This expansion wasn't peaceful. It came through relentless military campaigns, sieges that lasted months, and conquests that changed the face of entire regions. With each victory came plunder. With each fallen city came captives. And among those captives, women and children faced fates that would alter the course of their lives forever. The Ottoman military machine operated with brutal efficiency. When an army approached a city, the outcome for its inhabitants depended largely on whether the city surrendered or resisted. Those who surrendered might be spared the worst atrocities. Those who resisted faced the full fury of conquest. Let's look at one of the most pivotal moments in Ottoman history: the fall of Constantinople in 1453. After a 53-day siege, Sultan Mehmed II's forces breached the ancient walls of the Byzantine capital on May 29th. What followed was a period of sanctioned looting and violence that contemporary sources describe in harrowing detail. Eyewitness accounts, including those from Venetian observer Niccolò Barbaro, describe Ottoman soldiers storming through the city, seeking gold, jewels, and human captives. Women were targeted specifically. Nuns were dragged from monasteries, raped, and then marched to the Ottoman fleet to be sold as slaves. Young women throughout the city suffered similar fates. Some, facing the prospect of capture, chose to throw themselves into wells and drown rather than face what awaited them. Contemporary accounts describe churches being turned into sites of mass violence, with captive women subjected to repeated assaults before being hauled away in chains. The atrocities within the Hagia Sophia itself were particularly severe, where contemporary witnesses documented rapes occurring even within Christianity's most sacred Eastern Church. Based on various historical estimates, between 30,000 and over 50,000 people from Constantinople were enslaved and prepared for transport to various parts of the Ottoman Empire. But Constantinople was far from unique. This pattern repeated itself across the Balkans, the Aegean Islands, and beyond. In 1537, when Ottoman Admiral Hayreddin Barbarossa conquered the island of Paros, the systematic nature of these captures became horrifyingly clear. According to historical records, elderly men were killed outright. Young men were forced to become galley slaves, chained to oars where many would die from exhaustion and abuse. Young boys were taken for the devshirme system, the blood tax that would forcibly convert them to Islam and train them as janissaries. And the women, according to documented accounts, were ordered to dance on the shore so that Ottoman officers could select the most attractive for themselves. Around 6,000 people from Paros alone entered slavery in the Ottoman Empire. Similar scenes played out on islands throughout the Aegean. In coastal raids across the Mediterranean, entire villages were emptied of their populations. Once captured, these women entered a well-organized system designed to process, transport, and sell human beings. The slave markets, or esir, existed in most major Ottoman cities, but none were more significant than those in Constantinople itself. The city that became Istanbul evolved into the nerve center of the Ottoman slave trade. Contemporary sources describe these markets in disturbing detail. The Avret Pazari, the women's market, operated like any other bazaar except its merchandise was human. Every Wednesday, auctions were held where women of all ages were bought and sold. Italian ambassador Ottaviano Bon, writing in the early 1600s, described an enclosed public market where female slaves were openly auctioned and freely bought by anyone with the means to purchase them, but the process was even more dehumanizing than a simple sale. According to French traveler Nicolas de Nicolay, slaves of all ages and both sexes were displayed, with many, especially children and young women, exhibited naked so potential buyers could thoroughly inspect them. This wasn't about preserving dignity. This was about ensuring the buyer knew exactly what they were purchasing. Women were treated as livestock, examined for physical defects, age, and reproductive potential. Price records from slave markets in Ottoman Crete reveal the calculated nature of this trade. Virginity, youth, and European origin commanded the highest prices. Girls between 13 and 25 years old, particularly if they were virgins and of European descent, fetched premium prices. The records show that Ottoman buyers placed different values on women based on factors that had nothing to do with their humanity and everything to do with their perceived usefulness as property. Age, race, beauty, and virgin status all affected the price tag attached to a human being. The journey to these markets was itself a trauma. Women captured in raids across Eastern Europe, particularly from Russia, Poland, and Ukraine, faced weeks or months of travel under brutal conditions. The Crimean Khanate, a vassal state of the Ottoman Empire, ran what was essentially an industrial-scale kidnapping operation. Crimean Tatar raiders conducted systematic slave raids into Eastern European territories. Historians Halil Inalcik and Dariusz Kołodziejczyk have tentatively estimated that approximately 2 million people of Russian, Polish, and Ukrainian origin were captured in Tatar raids and entered the Ottoman Empire between 1500 and 1700, though other scholars, particularly Alan Fisher, have noted that contemporary sources on both sides of the Black Sea slave trade may have inflated their numbers, making exact figures difficult to determine. Ottoman traveler Evliya Çelebi, who participated in these raids, described the slave market in Karasu Bazaar in the Crimea. His account is chilling, not for what it condemns, but for what it accepts as normal. He writes of mothers being severed from their sons and daughters, of fathers torn from their children, all sold among lamentations, cries for help, weeping, and sorrow. In his telling, this brutality appears as simply the way things were, as commonplace as any other market transaction. The emotional devastation wasn't considered relevant. What mattered was the profit. For the Khan of Crimea, slave raiding wasn't just profitable, it was required. As a vassal of the Ottoman Sultan, the Khan had to deliver a share of all captives directly to Istanbul. 20% of all slaves captured went straight to the Sultan as tribute. The rest were divided among Tatar nobility, sold in local Crimean markets, or exported to Constantinople and other Ottoman cities. Folk songs from Russia, Ukraine, and Poland from this era reflect the psychological scars left by centuries of these raids. One Ukrainian song laments how the fires burn behind the river, where Tatars divide their captives, how villages are burned and mothers are killed while daughters are taken into captivity. These weren't isolated incidents. They were generational traumas passed down through song because the raids never stopped. Once women arrived in Ottoman cities and were purchased, their futures depended on who bought them and for what purpose. Those bought by wealthy households might become domestic servants, though this was its own form of bondage. Those selected for their beauty and youth faced a different fate: the harem. The word harem comes from the Arabic haram, meaning sacred or forbidden. In Ottoman households, it referred to the women's quarters, a space segregated from the outside world. But the Imperial Harem in Istanbul was far more than a domestic space. It was a complex institution that housed the Sultan's mother, his wives, his concubines, his daughters, and the small army of female slaves needed to run this miniature city within a city. Western imagination has often romanticized the harem as a place of luxury and sensual pleasure, but the reality was far more complicated and, for most women within it, far darker. Yes, the surroundings were beautiful. The Imperial Harem at Topkapi Palace featured ornate courtyards, elaborate fountains, and rooms decorated with the finest Ottoman craftsmanship. But beauty doesn't erase bondage. The vast majority of women in the Imperial Harem were slaves. They were called kariye or jariya, terms that mean female slave or concubine. Most came from the Caucasus region, particularly Georgia, Circassia, and Abkhazia, though significant numbers also came from the Balkans, Russia, and Ukraine. These girls and women were purchased from slave markets or given as gifts to the Sultan by provincial governors. Upon arrival, they were given new Persian names like Dilfarib, Nazikita, or Gulru, names chosen to erase their previous identities. From that moment forward, they belonged to the Ottoman court. Their training was extensive. They learned Ottoman Turkish, proper etiquette, music, dance, embroidery, and poetry. They learned how to serve tea with perfect grace, how to move through the palace without drawing unwanted attention, and most importantly, how to please the Sultan if ever called upon. For the overwhelming majority, that call never came. Most harem women never even saw the Sultan. They spent their entire lives in service to more prominent women in the harem hierarchy. The Valid Sultan, the mother of the reigning sultan, held supreme authority within the harem. Below her was a complex hierarchy of ranks, with the sultan's favorites and wives at the top, followed by lesser concubines, and finally the ordinary slaves who did the daily work of running this massive household. Those who did catch the Sultan's attention faced their own precarious existence. Being chosen once didn't guarantee security. A woman had to produce a son to gain real status, and even then, her position remained dependent on factors beyond her control. The legal framework that governed these women's lives was derived from Islamic law, as interpreted and implemented by the Ottoman state. A Muslim man could legally have sexual relations with his female slaves without it being considered adultery. If a slave woman bore her master a child and he acknowledged paternity, she would become an walad, a mother of his child, and would gain her freedom upon his death. But if he didn't acknowledge the child, both mother and child remained slaves, perpetuating the cycle of bondage. Ottoman law was clear on this. Slaves were property. They could be bought, sold, given away, or inherited like any other possession. The notion that Ottoman slavery was somehow more benign than other forms of slavery because of opportunities for advancement misses the fundamental reality. These women had no choice. They didn't choose to be captured. They didn't choose to be sold. They didn't choose to be brought to the harem. Every opportunity they received came at the cost of their freedom, their families, and their former identities. Some apologists for Ottoman slavery point to the fact that manumission, the freeing of slaves, was encouraged in Islamic tradition as a pious act. And it's true that white slaves who served for 9 years could receive documents of emancipation, while black slaves could after 7 years. But this doesn't change the fundamental injustice of the system. Freedom given after years of servitude isn't the same as never being enslaved in the first place. What's often overlooked in discussions of the Ottoman harem is how this system extended beyond the Sultan's household. Wealthy Ottoman households throughout the empire kept female slaves, purchased from the same markets that supplied the Imperial Harem. These women worked as domestic servants, cooks, laundresses, and nursemaids. They too were property, subject to the whims of their owners with limited legal recourse. The psychological toll of this system is harder to document than the economic and legal mechanisms. We have price lists, tax records, and legal codes. We have fewer first-hand accounts from the women themselves. They rarely left written records. Their experiences were considered unimportant by the men who wrote the histories. But we can glimpse their suffering in other sources. We see it in the folk songs that mothers sang to daughters, warning them about the terror of raids. We see it in the accounts of European travelers who described women being torn from their families, screaming and pleading as they were dragged to slave ships. We see it in the desperate escape attempts documented in Ottoman court records, women who risked everything for even a chance at freedom. Irish writer Robert Walsh, serving as chaplain to the British Embassy in Constantinople from 1820 to 1827, witnessed the aftermath of the Chios Massacre of 1822. Ottoman forces had devastated the island, killing thousands and enslaving survivors. Walsh described seeing newly enslaved people from Chios arriving in Constantinople, documenting their misery and noting how families who had scraped together what little money they could were desperately trying to buy back their relatives from Turkish masters. He noted that approximately 41,000 certificates of slavery had been issued for people from Chios alone. These weren't abstract numbers. Each one represented a person whose life had been irrevocably shattered. The devshirme system deserves mention here, though it primarily affected boys rather than girls. This was the infamous blood tax in which Christian families in the Balkans were forced to surrender their sons to the Ottoman state. These boys, some as young as 8 years old, were taken from their villages, forcibly converted to Islam, and trained as janissaries or palace administrators. While this system has sometimes been portrayed as an opportunity for advancement, the fundamental reality was the severing of children from their families, their faith, and their cultures. For the mothers who watched their sons being taken, this was an agony that paralleled the capture of daughters for harems. Historians estimate that hundreds of thousands of boys were taken through the devshirme system over its roughly 400 years of operation. While these boys might achieve positions of power, they did so at the cost of everything that had defined them before their capture. The impact of Ottoman slavery on the regions that supplied these captives cannot be overstated. Entire generations grew up under the shadow of potential capture. Coastal communities in Italy, Spain, and Greece were periodically emptied by raids. In 1631, the Irish village of Baltimore was sacked by pirates connected to the Ottoman Algerian network, with 83 women and children captured along with 20 men. The demographic impact on Eastern Europe was even more severe. The constant drain of people, particularly women and children, to Ottoman slavery affected population growth, economic development, and social structures. When a community loses its young women to slave raiders, it loses future generations. The psychological impact created a culture of fear that persisted for centuries. The folk memory of these raids remains embedded in the cultural consciousness of affected regions even today. It's worth noting that while the scale and organization of Ottoman slavery were extensive, the empire wasn't unique in practicing slavery during this period. European powers were simultaneously building the transatlantic slave trade, which would ultimately traffic more than 12 million Africans across the ocean. Russian serfdom bound millions to the land in conditions that closely resembled slavery. The Crimean Khanate, while a vassal of the Ottomans, operated with substantial autonomy in conducting its raids. But acknowledging that slavery was widespread doesn't diminish the suffering of those who experienced it in Ottoman territories. Each individual woman captured, sold, and enslaved lived a unique tragedy. The Ottoman slave markets continued operating into the 19th century. The main market at Nuru Osmaniye in Istanbul wasn't officially closed until 1846, though this didn't end the practice of slavery itself. It simply moved sales indoors, making them less visible to European observers who were increasingly pressuring the Ottoman government to reform. The practice of purchasing Circassian women continued after this official closure, with sales taking place in private residences and through networks that operated outside official scrutiny. Slavery as a legal institution wasn't fully abolished in the Ottoman Empire until the early 20th century, and even then, the practice likely persisted unofficially. When we look back at this history, several uncomfortable truths emerge. First, this system operated for centuries with the full backing of both religious and secular law. It wasn't an aberration or a temporary breakdown of social order. It was institutionalized, regulated, and taxed. Ottoman authorities collected fees on slave sales. Guilds of slave merchants operated openly with their own internal regulations and officials appointed by the Sultan himself. Second, this system was deeply gendered in its impact. While men were also enslaved, particularly as galley slaves or laborers, women faced the additional burden of sexual slavery. Their bodies became commodities valued for reproductive potential and sexual availability. The inspection process at slave markets, the emphasis on virginity and youth in pricing, and the entire structure of the harem system all centered on controlling women's bodies and sexuality. Third, the long-term consequences of this system extended far beyond the individuals directly affected. The cultural trauma, the folk memories passed down through generations, the demographic impacts on source populations, all of these rippled forward through time. Understanding this history isn't about assigning collective guilt to modern nations or peoples. The Ottoman Empire that practiced slavery no longer exists. The people who ran slave markets and purchased human beings are long dead. But remembering what happened matters. It matters because these events shaped the development of entire regions. It matters because the women who suffered through this system were real people, whose experiences deserve to be acknowledged. It matters because historical honesty requires us to confront uncomfortable truths about the past. The story of women in the wake of Ottoman conquests is one of systematic exploitation, of lives upended and identities erased, of mothers separated from children and young girls transformed into property. It's a story that deserves to be told not with sensationalism or exaggeration, but with clear-eyed acknowledgement of what the historical record reveals. If you found this deep dive into a difficult chapter of history valuable, make sure you're subscribed to the Codex of History. Hit that like button and let me know in the comments what other historical topics you'd like us to explore. History isn't always comfortable, but understanding it fully is essential. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.